We can go ahead and move on now to the diplomatic front because this matters. After we cut the show, the most important thing that came out was that Russia actually submitted, Krystal, a formal military request to the Chinese government for military assistance. So this is the most outright ask that they've made so far of the Chinese regime. They paired it with an ask that they also help them economically. Now, this is where all eyes are in terms of the diplomatic front. Let's put this up there on the screen. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and China's Foreign Minister Yang Jiechi will be discussing Russia and Ukraine today in the city of Rome for the, quote, regional and global security implications. All eyes are on Beijing, both in terms of these talks, the carefully worded statements, and how they are going to respond here to the Russian request. Russia has really put China in a tight spot because China's been trying to both sides this, saying, hey, well, we want peace. And, you know, they're very carefully worded statements aimed at not antagonizing the Russians, but also not being seen as if they're fully on their side. Now they have to make a choice. Are we going to buy Russian oil? Number one. Are we going to buy their wheat as well? And two, are we going to provide military assistance? It shows you also the kind of the dire straits that the Russians are in. I mean, it's a great power military 1 month into, frankly, not that hot of a conflict relative to global security, and now they need military assistance. It's also possibly a gamble in order to force Beijing to take a side here. And all eyes also are inside Beijing of what are these people thinking. This was a very interesting article making the rounds here. Let's put it up there on the screen. A scholar affiliated with China's central government has given a critical take on Russia, suggesting that it is time for Beijing to cut ties with Putin. Now, let's be very clear here. This article was written by Hu Wei. He's the vice chairman of the Public Policy Research Center of the Counselor's Office of the State Council, the chairman of the Shanghai Public Policy Research Association, and more. He's an important figure inside of China. That being said, sometimes they translate stuff in English specifically to get us to talk about it. And I guess in that way, they have succeeded. However,
goal, here
we are trying to read the tea leaves. On the one side, the most hardcore propaganda, Global Times and more, very, very measured whenever it's coming to Russia. There's no calls for, we need Chinese troops, we need Chinese equipment flowing in to take on the Western imperialists. So the absence of that call is itself something. And then within the bounds of the debate, the fact that this is also put out there in English, could be a way to bolster China's image in the West, but it also could be a legitimate signal to our foreign policy elite of, hey, we kind of recognize this is crazy. Like, we want an off-ramp on this too. So we'll see what comes out of this meeting. Within the next 2 weeks, if they don't greenlight military assistance to the Russians, that in and of itself is a very interesting sign about what's happening.
Yeah, and we should also say both the Chinese and the Kremlin denied that happened.
Right. Yeah,
so let's just put that out there. Okay. But what was so interesting to me about this very well-reasoned, in my opinion, article
it was good.
Put
it was
out.
Quite well written.
It was quite well written. It was quite well reasoned. And what they effectively argue is that trying to play neutral is not working. Mm-hmm. Playing neutral is being seen as taking Russia's side.
Yeah.
And now you are on the side of this basically pariah state that is being completely isolated in the world. This is ramping up tensions with the West and with the U.S. This is giving them more incentive to engage in this competition with us that, you know, we're not really ready for and that we don't actually want right now in terms of like us also facing some sort of global isolation. It's also sort of getting Europe and the West act together so that they're all on the same page. And so that was the bottom line here. There's a line here that says, China should avoid playing both sides in the same boat, give up being neutral, and choose the mainstream position in the world. At present, China has tried not to offend either side and walked a middle ground in its international statements and choices. However, this position does not meet Russia's needs, and it has infuriated Ukraine and its supporters as well as sympathizers, putting China on the wrong side of much of the world. So this was pretty interesting that they put this out. You know, there's a couple other things regarding this meeting today between Jake Sullivan and Chinese officials, which is in addition to, whatever happens and whatever unfolds and the pressure that is put on China with regards to Russia and Ukraine. There's also the question of the Iran nuclear deal
that's right.
that will be discussed as well. And we're going to get to that in the next block and what exactly is going on there. Going in, they've said there aren't really a lot of hope. There's not really a lot of hope for a big breakthrough here. They said this meeting is not about negotiating any specific issues or outcomes. It's taking place in the context of Russia's unjustified and brutal war against Ukraine. This is from U.S. officials. And as China has aligned itself with Russia to advance their own vision of the world order. So they are setting expectations low. But, if there's going to be any path in the short term out of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, it's going to have to involve China, at least behind the scenes, putting some pressure on Russia and certainly denying them military aid. It is pretty extraordinary, if it's true, that Russia has had to ask China for military aid when typically the flow of arms goes in the other direction. Mm-hmm. It's usually the Chinese buying weapons from the Russians. So for them to have to come in this early on and say, hey, we need some help here is rather extraordinary and rather telling.
Yeah, once again, I don't even know if they need the military equipment. I think they're trying to force Beijing's hand into make it some sort of kind of a dual alliance against the West. But Beijing doesn't want anything to do with that. They have a lot more riding on the global economy and on trade than anybody else. And if they have even 1/10 of the geopolitical isolation of Russia, their economy is dead. Something that we'll talk about certainly tomorrow, which is that the COVID-0 lockdowns in Shenzhen are already going to spike inflation here. So by the way, if you want a semiconductor or anything, good luck, because Apple just had to pause production at the Foxconn facility. Yeah. Mm-hmm. COVID-0 in China is literally going to cripple the global economy. But that's another question for another day. Just
Probably
goes to show you.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah, we will absolutely be talking about it tomorrow. But it just goes to show that in China, their economy is very precarious as well as a result of their COVID policy. Now, on the diplomatic front of Russia and Ukraine, let's put this up there. This is interesting. So in terms of what Moscow is insisting, this is from Kommersant. Moscow insists on Ukraine recognizing Crimea as Russia, as the Luhansk and the DNR as independent, and, quote, neutrality for Kiev. Now, here's the key phrase. We've talked about demilitarization. They say no offensive weapons. Now, that is a very interesting phase. Not demilitarization, no offensive weapons. What they mean by that almost certainly are the anti-ballistic missile systems that we have in Poland, as well as obviously nuclear weapons. So by reining in, at least publicly, in terms of what their demands are, not full-scale demilitarization, but instead no offensive weapons and also not joining any EU or NATO bloc, that is a pretty significant change in the Russian posture. How that works out in practice, obviously a huge question. Zelensky still rejecting it, but apparently they could be, considering it. And also the political regime that gets to stay in charge of Ukraine, who knows, right? All of those questions remain. I'm not saying that this has a chance in hell, but it is a change in the Russian posture. And on the same side, let's put this up there in terms of what's happening. There is a tentative sign of peace talks. Russian MP Leonid Slutsky says that there is a, quote, substantial progress that in the coming days could turn into a unified position of both delegations and documents ready for signing. That's from Russian state media. Once again, he's a Russian MP. He's not the Russian foreign minister. He's not the Ukrainian foreign minister. We have no idea whether any of that's actually happening or not. But this is what they're saying to their domestic populace in state media. I don't think they would do so if there was absolutely nothing whenever it came to the actual negotiations themselves. And it's possible that the Ukrainians behind the scenes are a lot more willing to negotiate. So Zelensky outside pressuring as maximum military assistance as possible from the West, using that as a bargaining chip at the table with the Russians.
Yeah,
which would be the best case scenario.
You do see some language from the Ukrainians that seems to indicate there are some shifts and there's some potential deal in the making. they're supposed to be having talks today virtually, so we'll see if we get any progress out of that, even on things like humanitarian corridors out of Mariupol. But the fact that you have some indications from the Ukrainians, by the way, one of the things that they want out of the negotiations are reparations for their destroyed cities from Moscow. So we'll see if that's a deal breaker for Russia. But the fact that you have the Ukrainians sort of hinting at there could be a deal on the table and the Russians and state media saying the same, it's enough to have a tiny shred of hope. Not a huge amount that this is going to get resolved today. But when you see, previously sort of hardline positions being softened, being shifted a little bit, that's at least some sign of potential progress.
Yeah, these are all good things, and we should encourage as much diplomacy as possible.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it, you get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.